The ballroom glittered, as if the stars themselves had fallen into the chandeliers. Gold light spilled across gowns and mirrors, and the polished marble floor shone beneath hundreds of careful steps. Violins filled the air, their sound wrapping the room like a delicate net meant to catch every secret. In the center of all that splendor stood Lady Evena Harbury, 23 years old, calm and composed, her posture perfect from long practice. To those who did not look closely, she appeared untouched by the room. But inside her chest, shame tightened like a ribbon pulled too hard. Near the refreshment table lounged Lord Cedric Ashbourne, her former betrothed. He laughed loudly, careless and proud, champagne lifting his courage and cruelty together. When he saw her, his smile sharpened. "Not married yet?" he said, his voice carrying farther than politeness allowed. "I suppose Miss Harbury's love for books has frightened away all living men." Laughter followed him, thin and uneasy, though some faces shifted in discomfort. Still, the damage was done. Whispers moved through the room like silk fans opening and closing. Poor thing, unwed at her age, too clever, too quiet. Evena's fingers tightened around her glass. She did not look at Cedric. To look would be to give him victory. Instead, she raised her chin and faced the tall mirrors lining the wall. Her reflection stared back at her, pale and distant beneath the light, almost like a ghost wearing pearls. A nearby lady spoke to her, polite and shallow, and Evina answered with careful calm. Her voice did not tremble. Years of restraint held it steady, though her heart ached. Yet the orchestra began a waltz. Cedric swept his new fiancée onto the floor, her golden curls bouncing, as he smiled like a man who believed he had won at life itself. The sight made the room feel smaller, heavy with perfume and judgment. Evena could not breathe. She slipped through an archway and onto the terrace, where cool night air touched her face. London stretched before her, dark roofs and chimneys blurred by a soft drizzle. Rain tapped gently against the marble railing, a quiet sound that felt kinder than any voice inside. For a moment, she allowed her shoulders to shake, not from heartbreak, but from the long exhaustion of being dignified in the face of cruelty. Her father's voice returned to her then, from years past. He had raised her on languages and ideas, not on flirting and fortune. He believed reason was a woman's shield. Yet society did not reward such armor. It only tolerated cleverness when it came wrapped in silence. A shadow moved behind her. Lady Beatrice, her oldest friend, stepped close and touched her arm. "You needn't let him wound you," Beatrice whispered. "His cruelty only proves how small he feels." Evena smiled faintly. "Small men cast the longest shadows," she said. Not bitter, only tired. She returned briefly to the ballroom, danced once out of duty, then left early. Her carriage rattled through wet streets to the modest townhouse left to her by her mother. Inside, the fire burned low, the servants already asleep. The quiet hummed around her. She undressed alone, set aside her jewels, and sat by the fire, staring at her reflection. Her eyes were tired, but resolved. They no longer begged for kindness. A soft sound broke the silence, as something slid through the mail slot and landed on the floor. Evena rose and crossed the room. A sealed envelope lay there, marked with a wax crest she recognized at once. A crowned lion wrapped in ivy. Wintershire. Her breath caught as she opened it. The parchment smelled faintly of cedar and rain. "Madam, your reputation for intellect precedes you. I seek a tutor of rare discernment for my nephew, recently orphaned, and in need of both education and compassion. The appointment would be at Wintershire Hall. Your discretion will be appreciated. Alexander Whitestone, Duke of Wintershire. She read it twice, her fingers tracing the ink as if it might disappear. The Duke of Wintershire was a name spoken with respect and unease. 38 years old, veteran of Waterloo, widower, a man said to unsettle even Parliament. But why would such a man write to her, a woman the Ton had already judged and dismissed? Doubt rose quickly. A single woman under a duke's roof would invite endless gossip. Yet what awaited her if she stayed? More whispers, more careful smiles, nights haunted by Cedric's laughter. By morning, she had decided. Mist rolled along the cobblestones when the carriage arrived. Ivana stood at the door in a plain traveling cloak, her books packed carefully at her side. Her maid fretted about propriety. Ivana only smiled. "A woman may live without affection," she said softly, "but not without purpose." As the coach carried her away from London, she watched the city fade into gray. Cedric would not notice her absence. Not yet. Rain streaked the windows as fields replaced rooftops. She pressed her palm to the glass, making a silent vow that she would never again measure her worth by a man's approval. Hours later, sunlight broke through the clouds. She drew the Duke's letter from her satchel once more. Near the signature was a faint smudge, as if his hand had paused. For reasons she could not name, it felt like a promise. Wintershire Hall emerged from the fog like something imagined by a poet. Stone towers rose above dark trees, the air colder and older as she passed through the gates. When the carriage stopped, she steadied herself. Inside, the hall was vast and quiet, lined with portraits of stern ancestors. Somewhere above, a great clock ticked. The Duke appeared at the far end of the corridor. Tall, dressed in dark wool, his posture carried command. A faint scar crossed his temple, his hair already touched with silver, and his gray eyes studied her not with curiosity, but with calm intent. "Miss Harberry," he said, his voice quiet but strong, "you are prompt." "I have little fondness for London," she replied evenly. A brief shadow of amusement crossed his face. "Then we are agreed." He led her through long corridors to a study warmed by books and firelight. A boy of 10 sat near the hearth, watching her closely. "Henry," the Duke said, his voice softer now, "this is Miss Harberry." "She doesn't look like a tutor," the boy said. "No," the Duke replied, glancing at Ivana. "She does not." She smiled at the child. "That may be an advantage," she said gently. As the boy grinned, the Duke turned away, hiding what might have been approval. Ivana felt it then. Whatever awaited her in this house, it would change her life, but she did not yet know whether it would save her or destroy her. Life at Wintershire settled into a quiet rhythm that felt unreal after London. Mornings began with lessons in the library, where tall windows let in pale light and the smell of old paper mixed with polish. Henry learned quickly. His questions spilled out without fear, and Ivana answered with patience and warmth. For the first time in years, she felt useful without being judged. The Duke rarely joined the lessons, yet she often sensed his presence. Sometimes she glimpsed him pausing outside the door, listening as she read history aloud. He never interrupted. When their eyes met by chance, he inclined his head and moved on, leaving behind a strange warmth that unsettled her more than open attention ever could. The servants noticed the change before she did, and the house felt less hollow. Laughter returned, quiet, but real. Even the portraits seemed less severe in the evenings when Henry read by the fire and Ivana played the piano. She played softly at first, unsure, but the melodies grew stronger with each night. Music filled rooms, long left to silence. One afternoon, rain pressed against the windows, and Henry begged for music. Ivana hesitated, then sat at the piano. Her fingers found a familiar tune, slow and aching. When the final note faded, a voice spoke from the doorway. "You play as one who has known loss." The Duke stood there, his expression unreadable. Embarrassed, she rose at once. "Only longing, Your Grace." "That is worse," he said quietly, then turned and left. The words stayed with her long after. The next morning, a parcel lay on her desk. Inside was a rare edition of Plato, bound in deep green leather. No note, only the Duke's seal. Her hands lingered on the cover longer than propriety allowed. Whispers soon followed. "The tutor dines near his Grace. He walks the gardens when she reads. They say he smiles now." Ivana felt the danger in such talk. One evening, she found the Duke alone in the library and spoke carefully. "My presence may invite misunderstanding." He turned to face her fully. "From whom?" "From those who delight in malice," she said. "But you are a man of position." "I am a man of sense," he replied. "Do not let fools reduce you." Before she could answer, a maid entered, pale and trembling, holding a folded newspaper fresh from London. The Duke scanned it, then handed it to Ivana. Her name stared back at her beneath a cruel headline. The Duke of Wintershire's new fascination. The words cut deep, sharpened by mockery. Cedric's name appeared, quoted carelessly. "I have cost you your peace," Ivana said quietly. "Peace is for men who are already dead," the Duke answered. "I have only just begun again." The storm came 3 nights later. Rain fell hard against the windows, thunder rolling across the hills. Ivana stood watching the lightning when the Duke joined her. The tension between them felt heavy, unspoken. "I should leave," she said at last. "So I will not be your ruin." He looked at her with a gentleness that shook her resolve. "You mistake the matter. It is I who found peace when you came." Before she could reply, Henry's frightened cry echoed down the corridor. Lightning had struck the stables. Smoke filled the air. Without thought, the Duke ran into the flames, freeing the horses. Ivana guided Henry to safety, her lungs burning, her gown soaked with rain. When the Duke emerged, injured but standing, she caught him as his strength failed. Rain washed blood from his sleeve. Their closeness left no space for restraint. "Do you see now," he said hoarsely, "why I cannot let you go?" Her heart pounded against his chest. "You must not say such things," she whispered. "Then let it ruin us both," he replied. At dawn, smoke curled above the ruined stables. Ivana stood at her window, a resignation letter still unsealed. Below, the Duke crossed the courtyard, bandaged but unbroken. He glanced once toward her window, then disappeared into the fog. She knew then that whatever lay ahead would demand a choice she could no longer avoid. London welcomed Ivana back, with a silence sharper than insult. 3 months had passed since she left Wintershire, yet the city remembered everything it wished to wound her with. Drawing rooms grew quiet when she entered. Invitations stopped arriving. Faces once polite now turned away. She had taken a modest position as companion to an elderly countess who noticed little and asked less. The work was dull but safe, and safety had become Ivana's refuge. Each morning she poured tea and arranged letters. Each evening she walked alone beneath bare trees, fog pressing low over the paths. Then she told herself she had done the right thing. Leaving had spared the Duke further scandal. Leaving had preserved what little dignity she still possessed. Yet memory was not so easily dismissed. His voice returned to her in quiet moments, his steady gaze, the night of fire and rain, the way he had looked at her in the courtyard, as if she were already lost to him. Winter deepened. The city prepared for another season of glitter. The Countess insisted Evena accompany her to the royal ball at St. James's Palace. Evena protested, but duty demanded obedience. On the night of the ball, chandeliers burned bright, and violins sang beneath gold ceilings. Evena moved through the crowd unnoticed, or so she hoped. Then laughter cut through the music. Lord Cedric Ashbourne stood near the center of the ballroom, surrounded by admirers. But when his eyes found her, his smile bloomed with cruel delight. He stepped forward before she could retreat. "Well," he said smoothly, "if it isn't Miss Harbury, or should I say, the Duke's discarded tutor, not married yet?" The words struck with familiar force. His companions laughed. Evena steadied herself, her voice calm. "Some silences are chosen, my lord." Cedric's smile faltered, then sharpened again. "England forgets quickly," he said, "if one keeps her head bowed." Before Evena could answer, the music stopped. A herald's voice rose clear and commanding. "His Grace, the Duke of Wintershire." The name rippled through the hall like a bell struck hard. Evena turned, her heart leaping painfully. He stood at the entrance, tall and unmistakable, dressed in dark velvet. Medals caught the light at his chest. Yet his eyes searched the room for only one person. Whispers spread. Cedric stepped back, color draining from his face. The Duke moved through the crowd without haste, past nobles and royalty alike. He stopped before Evena and bowed deeply, not out of habit, but respect. "Miss Harbury," he said, "I trust London has treated you well." "As well as London remembers to," she replied. A trace of warmth touched his mouth. "Then it remembers poorly." He extended his hand. "May I have this dance?" The room seemed to hold its breath. Evena knew what accepting would mean. The whispers would return, louder than ever. Yet the world had already judged her. She placed her hand in his. "Yes, Your Grace." They moved to the center of the floor as the orchestra resumed. His hand at her back was steady, protective. Around them, judgment swirled, but within that small space, there was only shared breath and unspoken truth. "You should not have come," she whispered. "I came because I must," he replied. "A man cannot live beneath silence forever." When the music ended, he did not release her hand. Before the eyes of the court, he sank to one knee. A gasp swept the hall. "I once believed love required permission," the Duke said, his voice carrying. "I was wrong. It requires courage." The silence that followed felt sacred. Evena's breath caught painfully. "You will never again doubt your worth," he said quietly to her. "Not while I live." Applause began, hesitant, then growing. Cedric turned away, his victory undone. Spring came quietly to Wintershire. There was no grand announcement, no parade of approval. The Duke insisted on a simple ceremony within his own halls. "Joy," he said, "should enter without witnesses." Evena stood once more before a mirror, this time in soft ivory, jasmine pinned above her heart. When she descended the stairs, the Duke waited below. Their eyes met, and the years of loneliness between them fell away. The vows were spoken before a small circle. Henry beamed like sunlight. When the ring was placed on her hand, Evena felt not possession, but promise. Afterward, a carriage arrived bearing Cedric's crest. He entered the hall humbled, his voice stripped of mockery. He did not beg, only spoke of understanding too late gained. Ivana listened, calm and unbored. "Justice need not be cruelty," she said. Cedric left quietly, swallowed by mist. That evening, Ivana and the Duke walked the gardens as stars appeared above them. Snowdrops pushed through thawed earth, fragile yet determined. "Do you regret it?" he asked. "Only that I believed my worth belonged to others," she said. He took her hands. "You rebuilt more than my home. You gave it breath." "And you," she replied, "gave me the right to stand unbroken." Inside, firelight glowed warm. Outside, the world moved on, already preparing new judgments. But within Wintershire, dignity had become rebellion, and love its quiet reward. And far away in London, a man who once mocked a woman's silence finally understood what it had cost him.